Joining us now from our Bloomberg Deals team, Ruth David, and Global Head of Transactions at Ernst & Young, Steve Krouskos. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
So the world is focusing on trade this morning. Is it affecting the world of M&A? Is this something that is going to bleed in? We're already seeing the start of CEOs talking about the fact that this is a problem for them. We saw Daimler coming out and talking about it a few days back. When you talk to people, is that the number one thing on their mind?
So interestingly, Guy, trade is not the number one thing on their mind. So if you look at the M&A market, it's not been impacted by trade, and I don't expect it will be in the near to medium term. Now, is trade an issue that CEOs talk about? Absolutely. But the first issue they talk about is technological disruption, how that's impacting their business models, how they have to be on the front foot in battling that issue and getting ahead of their competitors. So while trade is there, it's an issue they feel they can manage. I mean, remember, if you look at all the tariffs that are out there right now, you're talking about, if they were imposed, potentially 0.1% of GDP that gets eroded. Now, unless we were to go to a full-scale, trade war with barriers, true hard barriers going up across borders, I don't think it becomes an issue that'll get to the top of the C-suite.
You're saying trade is not an issue. What about rising protectionism, especially given all that we've seen with the U.S. around China? How is that playing into M&A, and how is that going to affect the pipeline?
So, again, trade's an issue. It's just not an issue around M&A yet. On protectionism, yes, protectionism has been an issue. And so, for example, the biggest indication of that has been China. And last week, for example, as you know, CFIUS, which is the Committee for Investment, Foreign Investment in the United States, the charter was sort of revised,
yes.
And a new charter went through the House last week by a landslide margin, should go through the Senate and get passed by the President pretty easily. The extended powers of CFIUS in this new bill not only allow CFIUS to block M&A activity by Chinese companies, but now actually give CFIUS the right to block joint ventures, and even joint ventures U.S. companies might be doing in China. And that's how a lot of these companies enter the China market. So, I believe that protectionism is an issue. China is the one that's really stood out. If you look at outbound activity from China to the rest of the world, into the U.S. particularly, it's fallen off a cliff, right, over the last 2 years. Now, that doesn't seem sustainable, and I hope it won't continue into the future. But the bright side of me says we're having a record M&A year even without that China outbound phenomena, so that's pretty impressive.
Is Europe the same? The U.S. clearly is tightening up, but we're hearing kind of similar mutterings from the Merkel administration, from elsewhere in Europe. But does Europe have the sort of the integrated approach that means we're going to see a less of an effect than we are seeing in the United States? Look, China continues to trade with Europe, or do M&A with Europe a bit more than the U.S., but it's still not a lot compared to a couple of years ago. Most of the activity is around the ASEAN region, China into the ASEAN region, into Japan, a bit into Australia. I mean, the bulk of the activity in China right now is consolidation internally, consolidation of the SOEs. That's not a bad thing, because there's efficiencies to be gained there, and they're building stronger companies for the long run. So the Chinese market will continue to be strong, but it is domestic transactions primarily.
Steve, we've seen investors kind of not shoot down, but the response on big M&A, investors are sending the stock down, whether, Conagra, Pinnacle, Eutelsat for Inmarsat. Last week, we wrote this story that they were going to make a bid, and then the stock fell, and they first said they were considering it, then they said, no, we're not actually. Do you think investor fatigue is setting in on this big transformative M&A, and how do you see that playing out?
I don't think investor fatigue is setting in on big transformative M&A. I think big transformative M&A, it's hard to predict when it happens. These are deals that have a long time sort of in the oven, so to speak. And, it's not unusual to get a strong reaction one way or another to a large deal. We've had a lot of mega deals so far this year, and whether we'll continue that pace the rest of the year, I don't know. We're obviously on a record pace. To me, the M&A market right now isn't so much defined by these mega deals. I know that's what makes the headlines. But to me, it's the deals below $10 billion, the deals that are enabling companies to cross sector lines, expand technology. Those are the ones that I think are the bread and butter of the market.
How much did the Time Warner deal change everything from a vertical point of view?
Well, I think it was a big indicator, right? That a vertical integration would not be stopped. So I think that was a very positive.
Does it sort of set in train a whole load of others? You talked about the fact that we're on a record pace this year. Do we now? Has that opened the door?
I think it certainly signals the door is not closed, right?
Okay.
Because prior to that, you've seen regulators, not just in the U.S., but in other countries, starting to get more creative and more broad in how they interpret antitrust non-competition guidelines, looking into R&D platforms, trying to look into what the future of the competitive landscape could look like. I think allowing a vertical integration like this is a positive sign, and that could spark other deals. Now, whether we'll be on the same pace second half as we've seen first half, not sure. I didn't expect, frankly, the pace in the second quarter to be as strong as it was. So at this point, it likely will be a record year, but it'll be difficult to maintain the pace we're on for another 6 months.
It's great to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Great to see you both. Thank you.
For coming to see us. Steve Krouskos, he is the Global Head of Transaction at Ernst & Young.